Well, the National Grandparents Pilgrimage is a pilgrimage to Knock that began in 2007. I happened to be in Knock last year when the Cardinal celebrated Mass on that day, and I think it's a really exciting idea because the pilgrimage is highlighting the active, dynamic role that grandparents play in the lives of families and particularly their grandchildren. So it's an opportunity to celebrate that and to highlight it. I suppose the first thing about the National Grandparents Day is that it's highlighting something. When I was a child, I think I thought grandparents were ancient. You know, you had this idea of old people sitting in the corner and being looked after. But at confirmation now, day after day, I meet grandparents, grandmothers and grandfathers, and they're amazingly energetic and young and active. Many of them are still working, so they are people with a lot of energy, and with particularly a lot of affection and a lot of time for their grandchildren and for their own children. And at a time when many parents are, as someone said, money rich but time poor, the one thing that grandparents can do is offer time and interest and attention. And I look back to my own grandmother and I think of how much I loved her and how important she was to me. And I think for the children that I see at confirmation, I think their relationship with their grandparents is hugely important. Many of them have deep faith, and they also have an experience of life and an experience of the church that is hugely enriching to their grandchildren. And I think the pilgrimage highlights for grandparents how important they are to their grandchildren and to their own children. And I think that's a hugely important thing to highlight, and I'm very glad to be part of it. Yes, a few years ago when I was visiting a primary school and I asked the children if they wanted somebody to pray for them, if they had something that, for example, an exam coming up and they wanted someone to pray for them, I asked who would they ask to pray for that intention. And pretty much without exception they said, my granny. My granny says the rosary. My granny lights candles. My granny goes to Mass. My granny goes to novenas. And children recognise in their grandparents, not just grannies, but grandfathers as well, people who have actually a different relationship with them. They're slightly more distant and slightly more relaxed. And I just think one of the most important relationships in any family is the relationship between children and their grandparents. And it's also something that gives huge life to grandparents, to have their grandchildren around. I know it's not always possible. Sometimes they're in other countries or they're far away. But for a family to have the older members, whether it's the grandparents or grand aunts or grand uncles, available to the children as they grow up, is first of all a great support to parents. They can do all kinds of jobs like babysitting and shopping and filling in jobs that parents maybe don't have time to do. But for the children, that relationship with their grandparents is massively important, and I think particularly in the area of faith. Grandparents, in my experience, pray. They are attuned to faith, attuned to God, and because they're comfortable in themselves, they can share that with children very easily. And children, I think, are hugely influenced by the faith of their grandparents.